Hi everyone, this is Noah Sandler from Mtgo Academy, and today I'm going to be bringing you my top 15 bombs of Kaladesh review. Kaladesh is an exciting set. There are some insanely powerful cards. There's a Gearhulk in every color. All of them are great. But which cards are actually going to make my top 15 list this time? Well, let's get started with number 15, Combustible Gearhulk. 4/2 red, 6/6 artifact creature with first strike. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. If the player doesn't, put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. Then it deals damage to that player equal to the total converted mana cost of those cards. So for starters, this is a 6/6 first strike for 6. So how good is that? It's very good. It's not an insane bomb by itself, but it's beating everything in combat. So you just turn it sideways, turn after turn. Maybe your opponent has a couple servos, they get to chump it for a while, but nothing is killing this in combat. Your opponent either has to have a kill anything removal spell, or this card is just going to attack, eat creatures until your opponent's dead. But it also has a really nice ability. So your opponent gets to choose. You either draw 3 cards, or you dome them for the converted mana cost of the top 3 cards of your library. So because this is a Punisher mechanic, your opponent does get the choice, and that reduces the value of the effect. If you just got to choose which one you got, the card would be better. Or if it just picked one every time, the card would be better. But both effects are still really powerful. I mean, you're already getting a really good card, and this is just gravy on top. So drawing 3 cards is obviously insane. If you just drew 3 cards every time you played this, the card would be unbelievably good. But let's look at the second ability. So top 3 cards of your deck, hitting the graveyard, your opponent taking damage equal to converted mana cost. It's going to depend on your deck, but if you average out your converted mana cost, consider you're going to have a little over 40% land, you're doing something around 5 damage every time you do this, and that's a nice bit of damage. So if your opponent's at a low life total, they're going to have you draw the cards, and that's great. If they're really a high life total, like 20, they're going to take the damage, but it's still probably going to remove some turns from the clock, so that's still nice. Another cool thing about it is the variance. Unlike a card like Browbeat, draw 3 cards or deal 5 damage, your opponent doesn't actually know how much damage they're taking when they're making the decision. So they may actually make the wrong choice. They may say, oh, I'm at 10, okay, and they're dead. One thing balancing that out is that, let's say your opponent's at 10. If you're going to draw 3 cards and there's 10 converted mana costs in those cards, you probably drew some powerful cards and you very well might win the game anyway. So they might just be okay with losing that game in that spot. But you put all this together and the card's very powerful, somewhere in the middle of bottom of the Gearhulks, but still a bomb that's going to win games. At number 14, Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter. 2 a green and a blue, 2/3 legendary creature. Whenever you cast your first spell each turn, reveal a top card of your library. If it's a non-land card with converted mana cost less than that spell's, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. If you don't cast a reveal card, put it into your hand. So the text is kind of weird on the card, so let's break it up a little bit. So when you cast your first spell each turn, and that's for each turn. So it could be on your turn, could be on your opponent's turn. So if you use it on your turn and then an instant on your opponent's turn, you're actually going to get this effect 2 times for each turn cycle. So you reveal a card. Let's just assume that you can't cast it. You put it in your hand. So bare minimum, you're drawing a card every time you play your first spell of the turn. So that's like drawing 2 extra cards if you play a card on your turn and then an instant on your opponent's turn, or just drawing 1 extra card a turn if you do something on your turn. How often are you going to play something on your turn? I mean, almost every turn. So this is very much like, draw a card every turn attached to a 2/3, and that would be amazing. But it's actually better than that. I mean, the downside is that you reveal cards to your opponent, so it's not strictly better than that. Maybe they can play around something that you draw, but you get to actually cast spells if the mana cost is below the spell that you cast. So you get to play them without paying their mana cost at that time. So you could play, if you play an instant on your opponent's turn, you actually drop a creature off the top of your deck, kind of like Cascade. You can't play lands this way because it says cast, so lands are always going to go to your hand. but that just gives you a nice mana and tempo advantage, and can just be really surprising. Like, your opponent makes an attack, and suddenly you just drop a bunch of stuff into play. So this card's insane. Definitely want to note that because I think blue is so weak, there are some really powerful blue cards that did not make my top 15 bombs list. But Rashmi is a green gold card, and there's a lot of fixing in green, so I don't really consider this a blue card, but it's one of the few blue cards that made the list. At number 13, Fumigate. 3 and 2 white, sorcery, destroy all creatures, you gain 1 life for each creature destroyed this way. So it's a Wrath of God with upside that costs 5 mana. And for limited, 5 mana is totally reasonable for Wrath of God. You're not getting beat down so quickly that you need to play it on turn 4. 5 is totally reasonable. And you do gain life to make up for that extra turn that you lost. But really, the way that I like to play Wrath effects in limited is not just to sit there, not playing anything, just, holding all the creatures in my hand, waiting for your opponent to just keep playing stuff and get full value for the Wrath. What I like to do is to keep playing creatures from my hand. Usually the ones that aren't too important. I like to keep my key creatures left over, but I want to make it look like I'm actually trying to keep up on the board, but my hand's just a little clunky. Maybe there's a really expensive bomb in my hand I'm trying to, stall to. And that entices your opponent to just throw everything down, thinking like, okay, I got to beat them before they get up to their, 6th land. And then you just wait for that perfect moment. They finally play that really good creature, one of the last cards in their hand. You play Fumigate, you gain a bunch of life, and then you've got a couple key creatures left over, and that should be enough to win the game. The life gain is also nice if you top deck Fumigate and you don't have the creatures left over, and maybe your opponent still has a good creature in hand. That extra life, you could gain 5 or 6 life, that could buy you enough time to draw into more creatures or answers for what they play afterwards. So it definitely adds some value to the card. And with this and Cataclysmic Gearhulk in white, you do want to pay attention to not, going too wide, overcommitting too much against white decks in this format. At number 12, Aetherstorm Rock. 2 and 2 white, 3/3 flying. When it or another creature you can, when Aetherstorm Rock or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get 1 energy counter. Whenever it attacks, you may pay 2 energy. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on it and tap up to 1 target creature defending player controls. So for starters, this is a 3/3 flying for 4, and that's great. It would be a high pick without any other abilities. But also, when it enters a play, you get an energy counter, and for any other creature you play, so it's an energy generator. Then its ability, when it attacks, you can pay 2 energy, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and tap up to 1 target creature defending player controls. That means that you just need to play 1 creature the turn after you play the rock, and you're going to be able to activate this ability, turning into a 4/4 flyer for 4 mana, and tapping your opponent's best blocker, letting you attack with other creatures, and getting a lot of damage in. This is one of those cards that your opponent needs a removal spell for it, otherwise they're going to die, because, even just having a bigger flyer, you just tap it down and keep the pressure on, making it a really, really high pick. And finally, a blue card on our list. At number 11, Confiscation Coup. 3 and 2 blue, sorcery. Choose target artifact or creature. You get 4 energy. Then you may pay an amount of energy equal to that permanent's converted mana cost. If you do, gain control of it. So this is as close to a mind control as you can get. It's a sorcery, so it doesn't leave an aura around to let them, bounce. Bounce works, but they can't use enchantment removal to get their creature back. So this is just going to give you a 2-for-1. You take their best thing, and you get their best thing. So it's like you kill a creature, and you get a creature. So it caps it at 4 converted mana cost. But if you have other energy sources, you can get that up to 6 or more. You can just take whatever you want. And it's artifact or creature, you can take their vehicle. And if you want to take something small, it's going to leave you with a little extra energy as well to use for other things. So really insane card. If blue wasn't so bad in this format, this card would definitely be higher up on the list. But unfortunately, with blue just being so weak, I'll take this card, but I feel like it might even be a trap to be moving into blue early in a draft. At number 10, Cataclysmic Gearhulk. 3 and 2 white, 4/4 artifact creature with vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, each player chooses an artifact, creature, enchantment, and planeswalker from among the non-land permanents he or she controls, then sacrifice the rest. So the way this works is each player picks their best creature, their best artifact, best enchantment, best planeswalker, and they keep those, then everything else gets sacrificed. And then it doesn't hit lands, so both players keep all their lands in play. So it's a very interesting effect, and being on a 4/5 artifact creature means that you can choose the Gearhulk as either your artifact or your creature. So it actually lets you keep 2 creatures, possibly 2 large creatures, a 4/5 vigilance, and then your other biggest creature. And if your opponent doesn't have any artifact creatures, they only get to keep their biggest creature. So it lets you get an advantage that way. Even if your opponent has the biggest creature on the board, you might be able to get 2 big creatures versus their 1 big creature. I mean, they could maybe keep a vehicle, and it really depends on the board state how good this card is. It's really going to vary, and sometimes it's not going to be that good. But when it isn't good, that's usually when you have a lot of creatures in play. Your opponent just has a couple, maybe 1 big creature in play, maybe a vehicle. In that situation, before you play the Gearhulk, you probably want to trade off your small creatures for their bigger one or for their vehicle, and then play the Gearhulk afterwards. So it's really going to depend on the board state, but it can be a huge blowout. And if Gearhulk is the biggest creature on the board, being a 4/5 vigilance means it just smashes in every turn, and you remove all of your opponent's smaller creatures, so it makes it hard for them to like double block and take it out. So it's going to play offense and defense. So this card's really powerful, going to win a lot of games, but also very dependent on the board state, exactly how good it is. At number 9, Skyship Stalker. 2 and 2 red, 3/3 flying. You can pay a red to give it +1/+0 until end of turn, first strike until end of turn, or haste until end of turn. So again, 3/3 flying for 4, already great stats. You'd love to play this card, but its abilities are actually really good and add a lot to the card. So giving it haste means turn 5 or later, you draw it, so you get an extra 3 damage, and whatever extra red mana you have, you can pump to deal even more damage. But then once you untap with it, you can give it first strike and +1/+0, and that basically lets it take out any creature in combat and survive. So this is just beating anything on the ground in the air, and once your opponent doesn't block, you just dump all your red mana into it, and they take 5, 6, 7, however many damage. If you're mono red, they can take a lot of damage. So basically your opponent's going to have to use a removal spell to kill this. If they don't, you just completely take over the board with this one card. So just great stats, going to end games really quickly, super powerful card. Number 8, Angel of Invention. 3 and 2 white, 2/1 flying, vigilance lifelink with fabricate 2, and other creatures you control get +1/+1. So this is another one of those fabricate cards where it really depends on the board state which option you're going to choose. But both options are really insane. So if we're just going to put the +1/+1 counters on, we've got a 4/3 flying vigilance lifelink for 5. Already insane. That's just going to win games. It just races so well. It's going to require a removal spell from your opponent. Otherwise, you're going to win. And it gives your other creatures +1/+1. That's amazing too. That's just a lot of extra power, helps you crew your vehicles, whatever. And then it has the Fabricate 2 ability to be able to put the servo tokens in play instead. That way you get a 2/1 flying vigilance lifelink. And because it gives +1/+1 to all your other creatures, the servos you get are 2/2s. So it actually puts 6 power onto the board, plus whatever +1/+1s you give to the rest of your creatures. So for 5 mana, this could put like 8, 9 power onto the board, and that's a lot. Now, it is pretty interesting, though, which one you're going to choose, because 3 toughness still is going to die to a lot of removal spells, and 1 toughness dies even more. So it's going to be interesting, whether you want to open it up to the 2 damage and 1 damage removal spells, or if you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, just get the extra servo tokens. So it'll be really interesting which one you choose. But most of the time, you're going to win the game choosing either option. At number 7, we have Smuggler's Copter. 2 mana for a 3/3 flying artifact vehicle. When it attacks or blocks, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card, and it crews for 1. So this is a card I think is, other than for monetary value and another card on this list, is going to be first picked out of most packs of any of the cards in the set, because it's colorless, it goes in every deck, and it's going to be better than any common or uncommon pack 1, pack 2, pack 3. So there are some cards that are individually more powerful, but this is just going to leave you so open that you're taking this a high percentage of the time, almost always. So 3/3 flying, and you get to loot, only cruise 1, only costs 2 mana, so very low investment. You're almost guaranteed to be able to attack with this on turn 3, so your opponent takes 3, you get to loot, they've got to deal with a 3/3 flyer, and then, yeah, you just keep looting. So it's just so efficient, cheap, colorless, powerful, that even though it might not be as exciting as some of the cards on this list, it's just going to be an amazing card in every single deck. At number 6, Demon of Dark Schemes. 3 and 3 black, 5/5 flying demon. When it enters the battlefield, all other creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. Whenever another creature dies, you get 1 energy. You can pay 2 black, 4 energy to put target creature card from any graveyard onto the battlefield under your control tapped. So this card, it's a huge commitment to black. You've got to have triple black. It costs 6. There will be some games where you just never get up to the mana cost to cast this card, and it's going to sit in your hand. But if you cast this card, you're going to win the game so many times, regardless of the situation you are in, that this card is just insane. So no matter how far behind you are, if you're ahead, whatever, this is going to wipe a good percentage of the board, leave you with one of the biggest creatures on the board, big enough to just finish your opponent off by itself. It's going to generate you a lot of energy, and then the turn after you play it, you can take the best creature from either graveyard and put it onto the battlefield for just 3 mana. So you're going to get a 5/5 flyer and whatever the other largest creature is. So there's just so few board states where this isn't just going to smash the game wide open, no matter how far behind you are. Your opponent has to have, well, like a larger flyer, a bunch of big creatures, and then a removal spell. It's just so rare they're going to be able to beat you from that spot, that, even given the commitment, this card is just so insane. And interestingly, one of the few cards that makes it worth it to run a Diabolic Tutor in your deck, because you just tutor for this guy, and doesn't matter what your opponent does, then turn 6, you just destroy their board. At number 5, Shaundra, Torch of Defiance. 2 and 2 red, foil loyalty planeswalker, +1, exile the top card of your library. You may cast that card. If you don't, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. Another +1, add 2 red to your mana pool. -3, deals 4 damage to target creature. And -7, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell, this emblem deals 5 damage to target creature or player. So I want to make it very clear, this card is very, very powerful. And it's going to be great and constructed, very high floor, very high ceiling, amazing card. It's still only the 5th best card in this set. And I want to talk for a little bit. So it has it costs 4 mana. And 4 mana planeswalkers are insane and constructed, and I mean, they're still very good in limited. But in limited, getting a planeswalker on in turn 4 compared to turn 5 is not too important. And I think the best planeswalkers will protect themselves well and have really powerful abilities that just take over the board. And Shaundra is not the best at that. It's okay at doing that, but it's not the best. So it will die a decent percentage of the time more than some other planeswalkers. And so while it is very powerful, it still doesn't crack the top 4 cards of the set. So let's go over it. The +1, exile top card of your library. You may cast a card. If you don't, your opponent takes 2. So if you want to, that's just 2 damage to your opponent every turn for +1. That doesn't protect Shaundra. It does bring it up to 5 loyalty immediately, so it is going to be hard to kill regardless. But that's only useful the turn after you untap with her, and depending on the card that you flip. So if you flip a land, because it says cast that card, you can't actually play the land. You can't cast lands, you only play them. So the land's just going to stay exiled, your opponent's going to take 2 damage. So if you exile a card and it's a card you can use that turn, you can cast it. But maybe there's a card in your hand that you need to play that turn, so even though you flip something useful, you still don't cast it. So only some percentage of the time are you actually getting a full card off that ability. So not like way worse than just draw a card, unless your opponent's at like 2 life. And then the second +1, add 2 red to your mana pool. That can help to protect Shaundra. The turn that you play her, you could also drop a 2-drop to help block. And then also the turn after you play her, I think that's going to be used a lot to be able to dump your hand and put out more creatures to be able to protect Shaundra. So I think that's going to be a really common play. The -3, deal 4 damage to target creature. So that's the like fail-safe. If we're just going to turn Shaundra into a one-shot effect, is that good enough? Yes. 4 mana sorcery speed, 4 damage to target creature, and you get a 1 loyalty Shaundra in play is really, really good. Even if your opponent just attacks the Shaundra, for like 2 or 3 damage and kills it right after, you're still happy. But that's not like cracking the top, 4 cards of the set powerful. That's just a very good effect. And I think that a lot of times, because Shaundra, if you use the -3, it goes down to 1 loyalty. I think it's just going to die a lot if you use it immediately. So it's not one of those planeswalkers that is just like unstoppable, can't be beat. If you're behind when you play it, you're going to be happy to play the Shaundra, and it's going to do good work for you, but it's not going to take over the game like something like Elspeth Sun's Champion would. So, very powerful card. The ultimate, emblem, 5 damage every time you play a spell. That's insane. Like, how are you going to lose once you activate that? And I think it's definitely possible to get to that. You might just use the extra mana the turn after you play her, set up your board, then just keep using the +1. Maybe you'll get a spell out of her too, and eventually use the -7, and then you can't lose. So still really, really powerful card for just 4 mana. You're not ever passing it if you're red, and you're first picking it all the time. But its lack of ability to protect itself that well does reduce its value a little bit. Okay, now we're at the top 4. This is where things get stupid. It's Noxious Gearhulk. 4 and 2 black, 5/4 menace, artifact creature. When it enters the battlefield, you may destroy another target creature. If a creature is destroyed this way, you gain life equal to its toughness. So this is Mekrital. Kill your opponent's best creature, gain life equal to the toughness, and you get a 5/4 menace that is probably going to trade for 2 more creatures. So easy 3-for-1 and gaining life. So, I mean, if you're ahead, you just win the game. If you're behind, you probably win the game. I mean, the card is just amazing. And black has reanimation effects too. There's a few ways to get this back out of the graveyard. So you get your 3-for-1, you get it back. Just game over. And another one of the cards that makes it worth it to actually run Diabolic Tutor, because you get this and it just swings you right back in the driver's seat in any game. At number 3, Nissa Vital Force. 3 and 2 green, 5 loyalty planeswalker, +1, untap target land you control. Until your next turn, it becomes a 5/5 elemental creature with haste. It's still a land. -3, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. And -6, you get an emblem with whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. So this is one of the planeswalkers where it all really revolves around one ability. And that's the +1. The first +1, the only +1 for this card. Untap target land, you make a 5/5 with haste, and you can either attack for 5, or you leave it back to block. So if you're ahead, turn 5, you play Nissa, you smash with a 5/5 haste any other creatures you have, and now your opponent has to deal with this continuous 5/5 haste. Any creature removal only removes the land, and then they have to deal with it again the next turn. And you have a 6 loyalty Nissa, so they're on the back foot, and the only way they're going to get out of it is to kill your Nissa. That's just not happening. So if you're ahead, like, you just win the game when you play this card. And if you're behind, it goes up to 6 loyalty, which is a lot, and gives you a 5/5 blocker. Never mind what else you have on the board, that's going to protect itself. Your opponent needs to have like a lot of flyers out, and you have no flyers to start threatening Nissa. In that case, maybe you can just race with a 5/5 every turn. So it protects itself really, really well. So moving on to the next abilities, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand for -3 loyalty. That ability is not that good. I think you're probably just going to keep using the +1 to just keep getting that 5/5 haste and giving more loyalty to Nissa. Maybe you have a really good permanent card in the graveyard, like you have a Gear Hulk, sure, get it back. Maybe once Nissa's at like 10 loyalty and you've already got control of the board, yeah, maybe you could get something back. But I think it's pretty unlikely you're going to use that. I just think the +1 is so powerful, and it only returns permanent cards. So a lot of the really powerful stuff would be spells, like removal spells you get back. So I think you're not going to use that one too often. And then the -6 is also pretty powerful. And you can use it the turn after you play Nissa. So you make a 5/5, you can block for that turn, and you get to ultimate the next turn to be able to draw a card every time a land enters the battlefield for you. And so that just means you're never going to run out of cards for the rest of the game. But the +1 on Nissa is just so good that I don't know, that probably isn't even better than just using it again and just keep swinging, or, you know, keep protecting Nissa. So even the ultimate, like, I just see Nissa being like +1, +1, +1, +1. I mean, you have the flexibility of using the other abilities, but I think you're just going to keep +1ing it. You know, maybe once it's at like 10, sure, just -6 it once you have control of the board and just draw more gas. But the card just seems so insane, so hard to deal with. Going up to 6, giving you a 5/5 blocker the turn that you play her. I just value that a lot more than like the cheapness of Shaundra and like the better ultimate. At number 2, Verdurous Gear Hulk. 3 and 2 green, 4/4 artifact creature with trample. When it enters the battlefield, distribute 4 +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control. Wow. So just for starters, worst case scenario, this is an 8/8 trample for 5. Like, not as good as Nissa, but that's still pretty insane. That's going to win a lot of games by itself. But most of the time, you're going to spread the counters around. I mean, the turn you play it, let's say you're ahead, you've got a couple decent creatures out. You make both of them big enough to smash past any of your opponent's blockers. Your opponent takes like 8. You have the 4/4 trample back to block. Next turn you attack for 12. It's just so much damage so quickly. You give haste to like all 4 counters. Does so much damage. And then you just get the flexibility of this card that whatever the scenario, you get to put the perfect amount of counters on each creature to just devastate your opponent, let alone with like flicker effects, self-bounce, get this back from the graveyard, whatever, to just make it insane. But this card is going to end so many games on turn 5, just put a game out of reach. And if you're behind, it just gives a massive crusade to your board and just puts a lot of beef out there. So yeah, just really, really insane card. And the number 1 card, perhaps unsurprisingly, is Sky Sovereign Console Flagship. 5 mana, 6/5 legendary artifact vehicle, has flying. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls, and it accrues for 3. So this is a colorless card. You see in a pack, you take it. Everybody's going to play this card. You play it, you kill a decent creature your opponent has. Crew 3 is so easy to use. You're always going to have Crew 3 available. You smash for 6, you kill another creature that they have. Yeah, the card's insane. You know, there's certain like instant speed removal spells that can work on this, but at a minimum, you already killed one of their creatures, and they need to have it or they're dead. So just completely insane card. It's colorless, so everybody's going to play it. You're never ever going to get past this one unless if they open a foil mythic. So if you see this, take it, go win your draft. The card is absolutely insane. So that's going to do it for my top 15 bombs of Kaladesh. I hope you enjoyed these reviews. Make sure to check out my top 4 commons and top 4 uncommons of the set reviews as well. And I wish you guys the best of luck in your pre-releases, release events, and drafts. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.